27. And so when we look about our church's Persian connections, we know, especially in our Malankara Orthodox Church, when we trace our history to the saying that our founding is from St. Thomas, we see that our church is really looking to the historical records dating back in our connection to the Persian church, because just like our church, who claim to be descendants of St. Thomas, and our Baba Trimini sits on the throne of St. Thomas, same goes for the Persian church, or the Catholic, the Church of the East, the Chaldea Church, or the different churches that are East Syrian worshiping churches that use the East Syriac liturgical language. They all claim to be as St. Thomas Christians. So like even in Kerala, include from our church, we know we claim to be as descendants of St. Thomas. All the other historically traditional Kerala churches claim that root, maybe in different ways, but from the Persian connection, for sure, our church does. We know that the Chaldea Pali, which is based in Thrissur, also uses that connection. Even the Syro-Malabar Church, with its roots claiming historicity to being Christian even before the Portuguese came, claim lineage to the St. Thomas being the founder, and with that Persian connection. Even so much that's why they are very particular in the Syro-Malabar Church. The Syro-Malabar cross is known as a St. Thomas cross, that what we know as a Persian cross, that that one with the lotus flower at the bottom, which many of our churches, all of us use as well. But I noticed even particularly the Syro-Malabar Church uses it as known as the St. Thomas cross. And that comes from this Persian connection. That's what we'll be highlighting in this lesson. So as it starts off with, we know that all historians agree that India had its connection with Persia. Well, first and foremost, because we know that is the closest sister church to Kerala, right? When you look at going west, the church, the Christian church growing from the Middle East, going both east and going west, the closest church to us, when you're looking at that arrow spreading towards Kerala or towards India, the closest church then is the Persian church, as the spread of Christianity is going to the ends of the world and through the evangelization by the disciples, specifically apostles and their disciples, and the missionaries who come down after them. And so we know that our church has had connection because of proximity. But then, just as Achen writes, there is those who argue that even that Persian church had a beginning or a jurisdiction under Antioch. So that's how they can continue to claim, even though that we have Persian connections, we should still accept the supremacy of the Patriarch of Antioch. But then, and as Achen writes, in this section, we'll examine that that argument. And so when we look at the first writings, or we start looking at the first writings for the connections of the Church of India and the Church of Persia, as Achen writes, there's a document called the Chronicle of Sirt, and it said it is written during the time of Shalupa and Papa, who were patriarchs of Seleucia between 295 and 300 AD. And it says the learned Bishop Dudi, which is how they say David, Basra left the Sea of the Persian Gulf and proceeded to India, where he converted many people to the Christian faith. And as Achen writes, if this story is reliable and the India noted here is our India, we can say that the Indian church had its connection with Persia from the 3rd century. The thing I will highlight for here in this section, as it is written in the Persian church's history in this chronicle of this Sirt, this 3rd and 4th century, or 295 to 300, this the end of the 3rd century going into the 4th century, there's already connection of our church to the Persian church. That this one bishop, Bishop David, is being sent from his diocese within the Persian domain and going into India to help Christianize and missionize or support the church there in India. And so this is a important connection that we have to remember. Like already by the 3rd century, going to 4th century, there's already a link there, because there are even people who still will doubt how far back our Christian roots date back in India. So then we have to look at the historical records of where it's claiming that. So as Achen writes, that when we look at this document and we trust that it is true, at least for sure by the 3rd century, going and the end of the 3rd century, going to the 4th century, we already know there was already a direct connection to the Persian church, right? And then the author who uses this document, this is Abe McDonough, who writes in his book, and he's the one who references it as Achen used it in this Divyabodhanam book, notes that there are 2 other instances taken from Persian sources, which belong to the 5th century, that also connect our church with the Persian church, right? And so there we see these instances of the church having connection with the Persian church. This first one, as he writes, is an epistle, a commentary on the Epistle of the Romans by Ishahad. The second one is a reference to Mana, the bishop of Rawardashir, who wrote the discourses in the Persian language and sent copies to India. And the third evidence, like it's, as he writes, it could either be North or Indian, or North or South India, but it is by Cosmas Indiaconopoulos, who traveled beyond the Red Sea, meaning coming from Egypt or Alexandria and traveling to the east, and going to the church in India. And he confesses about the universal Christian topography. He makes it his mission, this Cosmos Indiaconopoulos, that he's kind of documenting all the different communities of Christianity throughout this journey going east. And he mentions the church in India, or the Christians in India, where as he writes, the land where the pepper grows. So particularly, that's what we say that its meaning should be more South India or the Malabar coast, because that's where we know that it historically, and people know that is the place where people would come for the black pepper, and the spice of pepper would be on the Malabar coast. That's the prized spice that is being traded, particularly from South India. And so he's referring to finding this Christian community here. But it also notes he also saw a church in Sri Lanka, because they went to the island of Ceylon, went to Malabar, and there's a small island off the coast of the Arabian Peninsula, so Korta, which there was a church, a St. Thomas community there. And so this is where we say that here's this third reference of a Persian Christian who is referencing the Christians in this eastern region of the world. He's mentioning all these things during his travels. Like I said, he mentions as the place where pepper grows as Malay, which we understand would probably meaning Malabar. But there's other historians or people who doubt maybe that's not what he's referring to. But it might be a different place. And that's why he mentions that some people might say that it's not Malabar, that when he writes Malay, but he saw Christians appointed from Persia and other places. There's the island of Socotra that could be a place, but there's people who will throw doubt on it. But we know that our church uses these as references to show our connection, our early connection of Christianity, particularly with the Persian church. But the peculiar thing, is Achen highlights here in this next section, is that the Christians of this region, as this Cosmos writes, are understood now to be of the Nestorian faith, right? And so we have to kind of highlight, when we look at the early church history, when we look at the first 3 ecumenical councils, we know that, in Nicaea and Constantinople, the Nicene Creed is made, right? Technically, the full name is the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, where they teach about who is God, particularly the Holy Trinity, highlighting how Christ is both God and man. He is God incarnate, and that he came down from the Virgin Mary, and was, as we say, was born of the Virgin, suffered and died under Pontius Pilate, and raised from the dead. And then we believe in the Holy Spirit and the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. All those things are highlighted, all those paragraphs of God the Father, the Son, Holy Spirit, and the Holy Church. All those things are highlighted in the first 2 ecumenical councils. That we know the third ecumenical council of Ephesus, that it is the church fighting against or teaching against the teachings of Nestorius, who taught that Saint Mary was not the God bearer, but only the Christ bearer. And so then he was trying to make the distinction that it doesn't make sense that Saint Mary bore God, but that she only bore the human part of Christ. But then we know that the great defenders of the church, especially from the first ecumenical council, when Arius was trying to teach that Jesus was lower than God the Father, he's something a little bit less because he has a human form. And Saint Athanasius writes that if God did not become man, man cannot become gods. To become transformed by grace and mercy to become in the presence and and communion with God. In the same way, Saint Cyril, who's the patriarch of Alexandria, who's defending the Orthodox position that Saint Mary should be called the God-bearer because God assumes our humanity, but never losing his divinity, even while residing in the womb of the Virgin Mary. So we can rightly say that Mary is the God-bearer because God fully descended in the womb of Saint Mary and was born, and that's what and remained, and then she was still remaining as a virgin. That couldn't happen as the teaching of the Ephesus if we say she's only the Christ bearer. So it was a big discussion, this fine line of how we understand that Jesus is both God and man, and that early church made a decision at Ephesus. Say it is proper to call Saint Mary the God bearer, or the Theotokos, or in Sureni the Eldas Aloho, or in English we say as Mother of God. And so, but the Nestorian church didn't like that. They said that doesn't make full sense, and so they separated, and Nestorius flees into the Persian, what is now a part of the Persian Empire at that time, and is exiled. And then there's the Christians there solely accept that kind of teaching, and they're being separate from the Roman Empire, are not part of these ecumenical councils, and so they didn't see any problem. And so they're known as Nestorian Christians because the development of Nestorius and his disciples who kind of grow in this Persian Empire, remaining within what they understand is fully Christian faith, but the distinction of how they teach who Saint Mary was. No, they still see her as the Virgin Mary, but won't call her as the God bearer. And so these Christians with going east from Arabian Peninsula towards India, lots of these places that this Cosmos is documenting fall under this Persian church, who is known as seeing it having more Nestorian faith. And so that's what he says at the Persian church in 486 formally accepts Nestorius as a church father. And that's when they can formally say by this 486 that they're known as a Nestorian church, because they accept Nestorius as a teacher of the faith. And that's when they say he's a father, because the church within the Roman Empire at the time rejects Nestorius as a heretic, whereas the church in Persia accept him as a father of the church. And so as they highlight this, the church, even though that is Nestorius, a Nestorian does not limit their ability to expand. And so that this church of Persia have a great expansion of missionary work, going all the way to the ends of China. And so, and we know this because, when you look in the history of the church or history of the world, there's something called the Silk Road, that, the silk coming from China reaches to the European continent through this Silk Road, this land, land, not bridge, this trail that connects all these different junctions, right? All these countries and places together through trade. And so these Persian missionaries go all the way and start preaching the gospel all the way to China. So we know that we believe St. Thomas went there. And so even these Persian Christians write and go all the way to China itself, that even to this day, that I forgot the name of it, it doesn't say it in this, from what I remember looking, I don't see it in this this book here, or at least I'm forgetting which paragraph it's in. But they say historically they're in China. There's on a mountain side, and there's a formation that there's a Syrian cross or the Persian cross etched in the side of this mountain, because this is where they understand these missionaries had reached all the way to the place of China, because of the great missionary work. Even to the point of when we look at, of Genghis Khan, who was a Muslim, who was part of the Golden Horde of China, this Tibetan and this Mongolian place, and they start coming all the way to Europe to start conquering. That it says his wife itself was a Nestorian Christian, or one of his wives was a Nestorian Christian at the time before he converted to Islam, and understood them as being people of the book. Because even as people of Islam understood Christians as people of the book. And so we see this because of the expansion and the missionary work of the Church of Persia. And so that's why we say that this Persian church um, uh, is very key in expanding. And so that's why we can say if it went all the way to China, we know that for sure it would have reached India, both North or South India, because of their great missionary zeal of the church of the 5th, 6th, 7th, and all the way up to about, they still say about the 10th century was very, very active. But then slowly going down, and especially after the Genghis Khan and the Golden Horse start taking over and start expanding even in India and taking over lots of Central Asia and going into Eastern Europe. Then the church quickly shrinks because of the rise of Islam and especially of these other what's happening politically in the world at that time. But during this time, there's so much growing, and we see this the church of the Persian church really growing, and that's why we can see that our church really has a strong connection, can have a strong connection with the Persian church. That's why in this paragraph here, it says that Patriarch Timothy I of the Persian church, who lived from the 8th to 9th century, wrote to the monks of the monastery of Marin concerning the crucify for us him in the holy art thou God. And it says that in that second part of the paragraph, it says, and also in all the countries of Babylon, of Persia, of Assyria, and all the countries of the sunrise, that is to say, of the Indians, the Chinese, the Tibetans, the Turks, and all the provinces under the jurisdiction of the Patriarchal See, there is no addition of crucifixus e pro nobis, right? So they're saying, oh, this crucified for us. So, this is a more theological kind of teaching, and they're trying to explain this is what our teaching is, and this is what our people should be confessing, not just in Persia, but all amongst our Christians of our faith, from India, China, Tibet, the Turks, saying all the places he's mentioning. And so that shows, as Achen writes, that clearly states that by the time of this Timothy the first of the 7th and the 8th and the 9th century, they're writing this about the connection of the Church of Persia with the Indian church. And that's what it says. In other words, the situation in vogue when Cosmos visited South India continued till the 9th century. So the relation between the Indian church and the Church of Persia does go back to a much earlier period. That's what we said earlier about the Bishop David of Basra coming in. And then even Achen highlights here that even whatever may have been the place of service of duty or David of Basra, it was declared that the traditions assigned the arrival of Thomas of Cana in 345. Though in his details, the tradition cannot be defended, the possibility of an exodus of Persian Christians to Kerala during the reign of Sapor II, who persecuted Christians most cruelly, need not be set aside. That's to highlight the fact that, there's two different, within the Canania community, there's a difference of opinion. Why did the Thomas of Cana come to India? Is it because of persecution, or is it because our church asked for help and these families came for trade in Kerala? And we know that's from the 345, which is meaning the 4th century AD. So in any case, when we see all these adding up together, we see a strong historical connection of our church connected to the Persian church. And now this next section, I should highlight. So now we have to evaluate the Antiochian argument that the Church of Persia was over the Church of India, and because we always had connection. And even if we say we are part of the Church of Persia, they also say they claim they are also over the Persian church. And so as Achen highlights here in the book of the Indian Church of St. Thomas, Thomas of Cana came, he's coming from this region of the Antiochian church. That's why one reason why we're acknowledging the Antiochian supremacy, because these Canania people are coming in response, being sent by the Antiochian Patriarchate, helping our church. They base on these bases that the Church of Antioch has rule over the East, based on the Arabic canons of Nicaea, which we kind of talked about last time. Those aren't considered the official one. The official councils of Nicaea's minutes or canons are the Greek, but the Syrian church accepts the Arabic version of it, which comes later or written later. and so it kind of mentions this these particular places that he's in charge of the East and has supremacy, if you want to say, over the church, all the churches of the East. And so then Achen kind of highlights more that, how in that book that Philip quotes the opinion that Dean Stanley states that the Arabic canons cannot be adopted as the Council of Nicaea, but he adds that the author's view that is a collection of canon law widely accepted by all Eastern churches. This admission should have led Philip to attempt to unravel the mystery behind the Arabic canons. The reason he puts that is, though the Arabic canons aren't considered the official ones, but he says, by the time these writings are made, and like we mentioned earlier, there was a Catholicate, or there's a metropolitan of the Church of Antioch who's using these Arabic canons of Nicaea as the law. Like, though they might not have been the official ones, universal of all the church in the East seem to have accepted its teachings and to at some point and use it to kind of rule the church. And we know that canons, just as an aside, canons just mean these are the rule of the church, right? There's certain rules of the church that we follow, and canons can be are made by these church councils and by the synods of the local church to either expand, to lessen, to fully express the faith of the church within the context of that time, to make sure that we're fulfilling what the apostles had taught, of particularly about the fasting, the teachings of the creed, of the faith of who God is, who Christ is, who the church is, what are the sacraments. These all fall under the canons of the church. That's why even though, like in our church currently in Malankar, we always mention we are a church of the 1934 Constitution, which helps rule the bylaws of our church and the rule of law of managing particulars of the church in a legal way. That we know that the faith and order of the church, as it even says in the 1934 Constitution, is based on the canons of the church, right? And so we have to be very particular. Even says that it's the canon of the church that we use to follow to express the faith and order of the church. And so there's always a collection of canons. Our church is known as the Normal Canon, or the Syriac Canon is we're accepting. But there's a collection of all the different decisions of the councils and synods that are binding or kind of are leading or providing the precedents for the rulings of our church. And so these Arabic canons were being used by the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries during this time. Further, this section is highlighting how evidences of this these canons being used of the church, and particularly the Arabic canons are more specific about how the church is having rule over the church. But he mentions here in this section, or this section 5 of this lesson, that already by this time, even in the Roman Empire, there's been the established sees, or the patriarchates of the church, being first in Rome, then Constantinople, then Alexandria and Antioch, and where they have their rule. Those are the four main sees of the church, particularly within the Roman Empire context. And so within the Roman Empire, they say the Roman Patriarch, or what we know as a Pope of Rome, has jurisdiction over all of the West. The Patriarch of Alexandria has Egypt and all of Africa. The Patriarch of Constantinople has all of Greece and Eastern Europe and going east that way. And then the Patriarch of Antioch has jurisdiction over Syria, what present-day Syria, Jordan, the Arabian Peninsula. Says all the east. So how far does it mean? Most of the time within the Roman Empire, that's what they only have. Technically, will have ability to rule within their borders. But as Achen mentions here, it also mentioned that even though the Roman Empire doesn't have kind of ability to kind of rule or send soldiers within the Persian Empire, they say that there's an understanding that the Church of Antioch has jurisdiction over even the churches within that empire, because it's east, because they say he's the Patriarch of Antioch and all the east and all the eastern region. So there's always a discrepancy. How far east does his jurisdiction actually go? And so it is these Arabic canons that kind of stipulate how far it goes, including all these places in Persia and even to India, or at least they say it extends to to India. And so we have to be mindful of that. That's what people start using when they talk about using canons to express how we aren't under with the Church of Antioch. This is what this section highlights. Though we say our church is connected to the Persian church, and that's how we say that we're St. Thomas Christians, because St. Thomas missionized all these eastern regions, and we have a connection as a historical connection to all the missionary parts of the St. Thomas Christians. As Achen is highlighting here, there are people who will try to say that even though St. Thomas missionized and grew and built these churches, there was a understanding, by at least by the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries, by some within the Syrian context, that those churches all fall under Antioch. For better or worse, a lot of times it's for political reasons, or just because of empires fighting, or empires jockeying for more position and political clout. That's what we know even to this day. But we know that those things are there. Okay, that's that lesson 5. Okay, for lesson 6, we highlight the social standing of the Christians of the Malabar in ancient times. I'm going to kind of not take too much time on this because I know we're kind of short on time, but hopefully this is a thing a lot of us have heard, learned, and hopefully are learning as we're reading, are learning more as we read here in the Divyabodhanam book. The preliminary things about the Malabar Christians, as he puts in the preliminary remarks, are the Christians of Kerala had a respectable social standing in olden times. So that in this lesson, we will try to bring out the fact of the strength of the available evidence. We can point out in this connection the special privileges which the rulers of the country granted them, meaning the Christians of Kerala, on different occasions and their place in society. So then to illustrate this, we shall look at the copper plates that are grants to prove the second tradition that the Kerala Christians had in ancient times for the king of the world dynasty. So the key thing for this is, like I said last time, for better or worse, the people of India in general, or Kerala, there's not strong evidences that are preserved from ancient times of showing, peoples and cultures and things are being handed down, because of the monsoon, and things are easily can decay and fall apart if it's not, because we're in a very moist, warm environment. We don't have dry deserts. We're unlike in Egypt, the caves, the pyramids and the caves of Egypt, or in the deserts of the Middle East, where they can find places where the documents can be preserved for long periods of time. In India, for what it was not available, and they were not thinking to keep writing down and passing down time and time again these things. And those that were passed down last time got destroyed later because of other either political or other reasons that have not fully lasted. Certain things, small things, have lasted that we have to this day, but not large amounts of documents or texts or things. But one of the few things that are that we have historically that connect the Christians of India, particularly Kerala, to ancient times, or at least this early times of the Christianity growing in India, are these copper plates. Because if it's written on metal, they can last the centuries, right? They won't fall apart or decay like the papyrus leaves or the paper that quickly falls apart over the centuries. I'll just highlight when I remember when I was in Kerala visiting during my first and second year of seminary in St. Econs. I went to Kerala and stayed at Nalagiri Dera with Ivanis Dirmini. And at that time, Kuriakos Achen took us to different places, to know the history of Kerala. And I remember he took us to this one museum, and I forgot where it was now. And it has a lot of these small historical documents of Kerala history. And they're written on these small little leaves that are tied together with string, and they're very delicate. And it's a pre-Malayalam language. It's like a Dravidian, Tamil, Malayalam mix. And some of it they can even read, but it's very delicate. It's barely so much can be preserved. And it's talking about the government or something, the kingdom documents or history, things at that time. But it's very limited. And so we know in the same time, the church at that time was not able or, spending the money that probably needed to preserve such delicate documents during that time, other than the church buildings and these copper plates, which were very well prized because they were handed down from the king itself or the Rajas itself, right? Recognizing the special status of the Christians coming. So we know that on this, the first copper plate that Achen highlights is the one granted to Thomas of Cana. When the Cherokee kings were recognizing this merchants who are coming from far, they were granted a place, and they were given a grant, and it was written on this copper plate to be preserved for generations, right? And so that they know that these people were provided a land, provided a status, meaning within the caste system, they're provided a status. And as it mentions, their land were tax-free. They were given certain number of privileges, and the copper plates specify what their status is within the community, which at this time, when you look at it, is very high. They weren't untouchables. They weren't a class that couldn't do things. They were the merchant class. It is this class of these Christians in Kerala who are able to be the go-betweens between the lower class, who are providing the raw materials for things to be made, for this Christian community who are making this mercantile class, who are making and providing the services for the upper class, and they are be able to receive them, and they're able to touch or go to these places of the upper higher caste, and to provide their these services, because we know that at that time the caste system was very strict, that low caste people could not touch or be in the presence of high caste people, but it was these the caste of these Christians who were able to go between both. They were given this special status until the time, as it says, until the time of the Portuguese, and later from the Europeans, this Syrian Christian caste had these special privileges that were preserved on these copper plates. Achen highlights that historical scholars are of the opinion that these grants refer to the gift of the town here in Madhavar, the church had with the special privileges, and this is still highlighting this Cananea or this Thomas of Cana's family, the group. So at least by the 3rd century, we know for sure these copper plates highlight Christians being there. But then, like it says, 345, but others specify 774 or even 822. But they all agree that it is Thomas of Cana. So then, if nothing else, between the 4th and the 7th century, we see this merchant class of Christians being there. And then there's another plates, as in the Tharsa Church, also in the in Kulon or Korlam district or area of the grants of the Christians of that area written on these copper plates. And then these are in 2 sets. And so as it says, and then the copper plates have special significance because they reveal the place the Christians had in Kulon at the times. And just like I said earlier, how the respectable position within the community, but as Achen mentions, also the right to collect duties and do certain things for the community. So it just shows that the good status of Christian. That's why when I always think why we take a lot of people, Malayali people will always claim we are Syrian Christians, are taken very with great pride, because it shows in India we know that caste is a very big deal, right? We know that if you're from a low caste, you're not seen very highly, you're seen as untouchable or poor or not worthy in whatever way. But to say you were a Syrian Christian meant you had certain rights even amongst the eyes of the royal family and the Rajas and within the community of Kerala at large, especially within these regions where these kings had given the plates. It showed they had a higher status. That's why I remember I always thought it was funny when I went to a friend's wedding, was a Pentecostal wedding. The pastor there mentioned we're all Syrian Christians. And I always thought it was interesting. I was like, why are they claiming, they're a non-traditional church group, right? The Pentecostals, but they're claiming to be a Syrian, our heritage is Syrian Christians. And they take great pride in that, even though it's, Pentecostalism comes because of the Western missionaries from the 20th century. But knowing many of the people Pentecostal come from our traditional churches. But I realized the reason they highlight their, we're being of Syrian Christian heritage, meaning is because of this copper plates. Not and Syrian meaning not so much Antiochian Syrian, but this Persian and East Syrian, these people are coming. That there's a special status of the people who are coming, of the Syriac who worship in Syriac, and that's like I mentioned the last time. the Church of the East used Syriac, both West and East Syriac, as the liturgical language. So it doesn't necessarily mean just ethnically Syrians or people of Syria, but meaning the churches who worship with using the Syriac language. So that means both Syrian people, but also Persian people and Indian people. So the Syrian Christian means people who use the Syriac traditions and faith, then worship, right? That is really what it means, that we're highlighting. And these copper plates highlight the status of these Syrian Christian or Syriac worshiping Christians in Kerala. They're given these special statuses within the community, and it is a great pride for the community that though, and for better or worse, maybe we weren't great at missionizing and converting all the people, but we had a special status within the community of helping to grow and to support the community at large with that. In addition to this, the chapter goes on to the royal dynasty of the Vildervam, concerning the Christian royal dynasty, and this is from the 9th to the 14th century. Some people accept that there was a Christian royal family. Others doubt the credibility of it. There's some minor references, like Achen highlights this in 1439. Pope Eugenius of Rome wrote a letter to our most beloved son, the famous emperor of the Indians, and the Kerala Christians. They're assuming they're these emperors or this king is of Christian background. For sure, they know there's Christians there, but actually having a Christian ruler by this time, other than what we believe from the king's family who St. Thomas converted, other than that, there's really no evidence, both legendary or not, really supporting a ruler like we think the Raj of there. But though we know that there are these later when we have the archdeacons or the bishops, they have a certain being leaders of the Christian community. They have a strong status and even to the point they said they had soldiers under their charge and things like that. But the historicity of this family is a little bit in doubt. But part of the summary of it is that the first king of the Vildervam family, which I can't say properly, had its capital in Kraganor, and they had classes with the Muslims, and then shifted to Udayampur, which was known at the time as a ancient Christian center of the church. And they said that a church was built in the 510 AD, which is 6th century. And then that the dynasty continues to go all the way before the advent, it says, of Cosmos. But then, like as Achen writes, it's most unlikely, but that's where they have these stories. And then it mentioned that this Xavier Kurapura mentions it in his history of the church. But like I said, even those documents are very limited of an actual Christian kingdom. But we don't know, like because a lot of things at that time are very fluid. There can be kingdoms rising and ending very quickly. Even we know within the Christian church, the history of the Christian church in many other places. Even when we look at the church in the Roman Empire, even though we know that's a great historical place of Christianity, that when we look at North Africa, the Church of Carthage, and there's Saint Cyprian, who was one of the great saints of the early church. He is from Carthage, and even Saint Ambrose, or not Ambrose, sorry. I'm forgetting the name. Saint Jerome and some of the others who have backings from of Carthage, but there's no longer Christianity remaining within Northern Africa, except for in Egypt and small little pockets. The great Christian centers got overrun by Islam and no longer there, even to this day. So we know that, and we believe that Christianity spread to China, but no longer there. So though we know that there could have been a kingdom of Christians in India, like an actual kingdom, those are no longer existing, or it was very quickly probably overtaken by someone else. But the Christians remained, but an actual Christian kingdom did not last, if at all, during this time. The main thing that we can see throughout these historical documents, as we have been highlighting in this book, or in the sections of the book, that there's references time and time again of the Christian community within the Kerala context, and which is our Malankara church is from, and which we which we as a church take, that we take our history from. Okay, I'm gonna just take a quick break there just to say any questions or comments. Because if not, I'm going to start Unit 2. And then I'll probably get the first lesson in of the Unit 2 and maybe Lesson 2. Going from there. But like I say, if you need to stop me or ask any questions, you can either raise your hand or at least put it in the chat, and I'll try to answer them at that time. So we know that the going to the church now from the Christianity in Kerala from the 6th to the 16th century, we look at the Church of Persia, which we've kind of already talked about, but it's the Church of Persia and its Catholicate, which we know that our church, being a Catholicate, we use that as the name of our church. We're the Catholicate of the East. We take that particularly from the Persian context up until the 20th century. When we have our first Bhavatirme as the Catholicos, Kerala or India never had a Catholicate, stationed or based in India. The closest thing that we had were metropolitans, one bishop in charge of the church in India, but we knew of patriarchs and Catholicoses or Catholicoi coming from west of us, be it from Antioch or from the Persian church in Babylon or in Seleucia, different places where the Catholicate had stationed. That we see that our church had relations with these churches and these heads of churches. And that's where we take much of our ancient history from, right? So when we look at this section, we highlight that we know that there's questions of our church being discussed or connected with the Persian church. A lot of the history that we have is from the ecclesiastical history of Gregorius Bar Ebra, who answers many of these questions. And Gregorius Bar Ebra is one of the Antiochian or Syrian Christian bishops who reside in the Persian Empire, or what's considered part of the Persian part of the church, and so he writes a history of the church in Persia. And so when we look at the Church of Persia, it says there existed an old city in the northern Mesopotamia even before the church's time, which is Edessa, which the Syrians called Orhai, or now today known as Urfa. Today is my understanding. This was the capital of a small kingdom of Osharon. And the tradition says that the gospel was preached there soon after the death of Jesus Christ. We highlight this because we know that within our church tradition, we remember one of the kings of this Osharon kingdoms. And this is King Abgar. That if Eusebius of Caesarea, he notes in his ecclesiastical history, and Eusebius of Caesarea is a Roman emperor, a Christian from the Roman Empire who's writing a church ecclesiastical or church history. He mentions also this Akbar of the king of Osharon, and he contacted Jesus Christ to heal him of his leprosy. And it's the legend says that our Lord sent a reply that he'll send someone to come to him, because Akbar asks, because he's hearing these stories of this guy named Jesus in Judea who's healing these people and raising people from the dead. So he writes a letter because he's afflicted with leprosy. He asks for him to come, for the Lord to come to come and touch him to heal him. But then it says that the Lord sends his disciples to go. So it said the disciple Adai, which is he's one of the 70, and is known one of the founder of the church in Persia, the Church of the East. He's the one who's sent and heals this King Abgar. And a part of the story is also that it says that he takes with him a cloth that has the face of our Lord imprinted on it, and that is what he uses to heal this King Akbar. So that's why during our Mid-Lenten service, when we do the Vele Noim, we always do Qurbana during Mid-Lent, which is the halfway point, the 25th day of the Lent. And it's remembering that we placed the Golgotha or the cross in the middle of the church. Now that we know we're getting closer to a Holy Week and to our Lord's ascent of the cross to die and to be resurrected. But also remember King Abgar, because it is there, because partly, like it says, the history of this legend of the church is saying that he he wrote a letter to Jesus, and Jesus said he can't come because he has something to do in Jerusalem. Like his time is to be there because he has to go to the city of Jerusalem to die and resurrect. So he can't go to him, but he'll send someone after. And that's after his resurrection, he sends these 70 and they go and start preaching the gospel to all places. And so that what Adai brings with him is one of the shroud that had a face of Jesus Christ imprinted on this cloth. And he brings it to Abgar, and he's healed of his leprosy. And then his small kingdom is now Christianized, becomes a Christian. His family and slowly everyone around becomes Christian. This is where we get the present day Edessa, which later becomes a Christian center in the ancient times. During the early beginnings of the church, this Edessa becomes a place where they do missionary work to Armenia, different parts of Mesopotamia, up until all these. It's the Persian church's missionary work is based out of this city of Edessa. That's where the first Christians are in this area or this region, and it says because of this king Abgar, right? So even within the Byzantine tradition, the Greek and the Russian traditions, they also have this understanding of this apostle Adai, or the disciple Adai, going and bringing in healing for Abgar, and that's what they also call it, the Christ, the icon made without hands. And so that's where if you look in some of the Byzantine churches, you can look up Christ icon made without hands, or Christ made without hands. It's a picture of the face of Jesus Christ on a cloth, and it's this cloth that is what's healed Abgar. And so that's within both East and Oriental Orthodox churches believe this story or legend of the conversion of this King Abgar, and it brings that this Edessa becomes a center for Christianity, and especially this Edessa being on the border of the Roman and the Persian Empire is a great place for these missionaries to be able to go and preach the gospel or spread Christianity and the gospel far to the east. And so that's where it says, that's where we see the growth of the Church of Persia, right? And so that's why we go further. At this time particularly, the political atmosphere in Persia was favorable for Christianity to spread, and the country was ruled by the Parthenian kings, and they were favorable to Christians. But during the reign, the Sassanids, when they take over the Persian Empire, they're very conservative adherents to Zoroastrianism, which is a Persian faith that they worship the sun or the fire, and like Iran and these parts of Iraq, that was a major religion before Islam. This is Zoroastrianism, and these Sassanids were very conservative. They said this should be the faith that unites our people, not any other religion. So they're very against the spread of Christianity. So that when they take over during the middle of the when they take over at the time from the 225, up into the 7th century, which is up to the time of what Islam is now begins to start taking over the region. These Zoroastrian kings and religious leaders begin to persecute the Christian church. First and foremost, because they want that to be the what unites their people, the Persian people, or the people of the Persian Empire. But also they see Christianity as the faith of the Roman Empire, and so that they want to be separate, because the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire are competing empires, especially their neighboring ones. They're fighting for political supremacy and for resources and all those things. And so Christians with the Persian Empire were very much limited from these during this time. So that we know that the spread of Christianity, in addition to saying Adai was the apostle, or one who brings who helps convert Abgar, it also says that St. Thomas also goes. Like, we know that he's traveling to the east. He's sent to India, but he's going by land, or both land and by boat, whichever you want to go. He's going to these places of this region as well before reaching to Kerala or to reaching to India. And so he's also known as the father. Both St. Thomas is also being seen as one who sends Adai and Mari, who are the kind of the 72 apostles being sent. He's the one kind of in charge of being one of the 12 apostles, kind of leading them to these places and helping them convert as he continued his missionary work, going from India and then ultimately to, as we believe, to China, and then back to be martyred in in India, right? And so it says, as the Persian Church acknowledges Apostle Thomas as its founder, they see it more that he comes through North India and evangelizes the people there, and and he trusts Adite with the responsibility to remain there and to continue working the church. And that as he keeps going, Adite remains as the first like bishop after St. Thomas, being ordained to be their bishop and continue the mission, the work there, building up Christians there. And it started building up this Christian center within both in Edessa, but then also then what becomes later starts moving to this Seleucia Sepson, which is the empire's capital, and that's where the other disciple Mari, he's sent, and then he continues to spread Christianity within the Persian capital, and it says the church quickly grows, right? And so, like as you can see, there's a lot of detailed history of the church in Persia, where it talks about Nisibis, Edessa, and the shaping of the church in the east. The main thing to remember is that these cities of Edessa, Nisibis, and the Seleucia Sepson. Sorry, I can't say it properly. These are main cities of this Persian Empire, and that Edessa and Nisibis are on the border near the border of the Roman and the Persian Empire. So there's always this back and forth of these are central places where there's fighting, or kind of are Christians kind of being of the Roman side or of the Persian side, and being of Nestorian or the Orthodox or the Catholic, whatever you want to say. We see these centers going back and forth. And so that's the key thing that we have to be mindful of these cities. They had a historical place of being Christian centers, but at the same time, politically within not just outside of Christianity, but what's happening in the world, they were also major centers of these empires and of these regions. And so that when these things are happening, Christians are going back and forth to these places, and sometimes Christians in Persia do not have great connections with the churches in Rome, because their empires are at war. But when the empires are at peace, there's good communication. But when the empires are at war, there's strict, no communication, because one will be seen as Christians will be seen as spies for the other, or other things will be suspicious because they have a differing understanding of the faith, things like that. And so that's what's happening here in the early centuries, from that from the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th to about the 10th centuries, and up until Islam kind of gets on the rise and starts taking over. This is kind of the situation going there. And then even after Islam takes over, there's still this division between Islam and the Roman Empire as well. But this first Persian Christians history is more of this during this time of the Zoroastrians, from that 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries. Okay. Then on the account of this Bar Ebra, who was a Catholicos of Tikrit, or Tikrit, as Achen writes it here, but in other books you'll see it as Tikrit. That's why we know, like during this Persian Gulf War and this Iraq War, they always mention Tikrit. That's this city here. That's all along the rivers, the Euphrates, the great rivers of the Mesopotamia. He is the Catholicos of Tikrit, and he's writing now in the 13th century, this Bar Ebra, and he's the Catholicos of the Antiochian Church, but in this Persian region, right? The Catholicos of the East, and he's writing a partial history, which from his side, we would say it's a one-sided of being a more pro-Antiochian account of the church within these Persian regions. That he traced the Persian Catholicate only till the 629, and then he takes up the Catholicate and the Tikrit Catholicate to the Middle Ages. So the main thing is, by the time he is the Catholicos, he's a rival Catholicos. He's being of the Antiochian side, and then there's the Persian Catholicos in the capital of the Persian Empire as well. And so his history is one-sided, being more of the Antiochian persuasion, right? But when we look at his history, his ecclesiastical history of his writings, He admits that the gospel was spread through the Persian region through Edessa by its first bishop Adai, and who sent his disciple Mark to Seleucia, which was the capital, and that there was his successors of Bari, and then he mentions them. There's Abusa, Abraham, and Jacob. And so under this Bar Ebra's history, he says they were sent to Jerusalem to be consecrated. They were sent to Antioch to be consecrated in Jerusalem to become his bishops, to show that the Persian church accepted the primacy of the church of Antioch, and that when they needed new bishops, they sent their candidates to Antioch or to Jerusalem to be ordained or be consecrated. But it says that during this time that when it says the two of them had died, and it says that one of them was on the way had died, and all these things happened, and there's this question about how do they continue to consecrate these bishops for the eastern regions, because it seems very dangerous to keep going sending candidates from the east to the west just to get consecrated, because sometimes they're dying or they don't make it or something happens to them on the way. So that's what it says here. At this time, the Western bishop passed a decree that in the future, the Eastern should consecrate for themselves their leader, and it was not necessary for their candidates to journey to Antioch. This decree was carried out by the Persian, and thus the Catholicate of Seleucia was established, though it did not please the Antiochian Patriarch. Though the story is being taken in good faith in our church, from about 1934, it had many problems. So our church understands that, yes, because at the time there was an understanding that the Antioch was given the charge of all the East, and as a respect of his primacy, that they would be consecrated with his leadership. But because of the dangers of always sending people to Antioch, they said, you know what, you don't need to, no more sending their people here, just consecrate for yourselves. And then even our church says, see, that already shows even the early patriarchs of Antioch, though they might have thought, or though they had an understanding that they had primacy or ultimately some say the supremacy, they understood that it was not one to be overruling them, but to say that, they can rule for themselves and consecrate bishops for themselves so that they can preserve the community in their region, to preserve the Christian faith in those places, so that they won't be left without a bishop or a patriarch or Catholicos because they died on the way to Antioch. They can consecrate for themselves. There's already bishops there following the canons of having 2 to 3 bishops to raise up for themselves a bishop. They were told to do that. And so that was the understanding of the Persian church, that they would raise for themselves their bishops, so that there was no need to go back to Antioch for their leadership or for the need for bishops. So then we have the discussion about how credible is this account that because of these Arabic canons, that it was understood that the Patriarch of Antioch needed to consecrate bishops for the Persian or the Eastern churches. And is this story that the Barber writes true, that the first ones are being sent and some of them died, and so then later the Patriarch said, you know what, just consecrate for yourselves. How much can we take stock in these stories? From our perspective, as written in the Divyabodhanam book, it says that it makes it makes some strong points to saying that from its early days, the Seleucia had a special reverence for Antioch, but this could not be kept up for a long time because of the gravity of what's happening. And so then we say they allowed them for themselves, but they recognize its supremacy. 2, that this Ecclesiastes is being written by Bar Ebra, and he's reading from the Antioch perspective, and that's why he's writing it in that way. And then 3rd, the office of the Patriarch, with jurisdiction over vast territories, was a much later development in the church. From Achen's perspective, when you look really when you look at the historical writings, how much did the Patriarch really rule over these vast regions going far east to India and maybe even further? We don't see that happening to a lot later centuries, that this idea of supremacy over far-reaching Eastern churches, and not just the regions within the Roman Empire close to them, that doesn't come to a lot later. And so that's at least when you see the historical writings, there's no real sense of it until you start getting to like a lot later centuries, where they're starting to exert more pressure or more ruling over the churches in the East. And so then as I was writing this fourth point, in this context, the questions are relevant. Who was the patriarch of Antioch in whose times these happened, and who was the bishop of Jerusalem? I forgot to mention the bishop of Jerusalem at the time, because they couldn't reach Antioch. It said one of them had to get consecrated at Antioch, and Antiochian patriarch is kind of told the patriarch or the bishop of at the time bishop of Jerusalem to do that for him, because at that time the Jerusalem church didn't have it, wasn't a patriarchate. That happened later, and he had the ability to tell them, hey, consecrate this bishop for me. Who are them, and where do we see any writings, and then who gives them this ability to make decisions for them? None of that's all very clear. That's what I'm saying. Where did this? Doesn't mention any synod minutes or any canonical there's no mention of a synod meeting. It just mentioned that these things just happened in this history of Bar Ebra, and so then it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Really, what does it mean when all this happens, right? And so then it seems to be that this ecclesiastical history, though it has a very lot of great points about writing about the history of the Church of the East, specific the Persian Church or the Church of the East, but written from this Antiochian perspective, or this patriarch of Antiochian perspective. We know that their viewpoint or their truth is coming from a slanted view, right? That's like, especially now today, many people very quickly write about false news, right? Like we see that all the time on, be it from President Trump or from or political from both left and right, claiming the other one is wrong or saying false statements left or right. To a lot of times we have to understand that people are writing from their own perspectives, right? People are writing from their viewpoint always. You can always make history to go either one way or the other based on how you're going to present it. And so as we look at even historical writings, this Bar Ebra is writing in the 13th century, which is many years before, and that's closer to the time of the beginnings of Christianity and Jesus Christ than we are. We're 2,000 plus years away, versus they were only 1,000 plus years away. But so we take them a little bit more seriously, but we have to always understand everyone is writing or understanding with their own perspective. Even our church, the Munkar Church, who was trying to preserve us as an independent and a growing church, we can't deny that we're also always looking from our perspective of how we can prove or how we can continue to uphold our independence, right? And so, for better or worse, we always have to understand people are writing from those perspectives. And so even though we can see it going one way or the other, in the end, we have to see what is it hopefully ending up leading us? Where is the church better growing for the needs of the community, right? And so that's why I always feel like in our church, when we always claim that our church should be an independent one, meaning a self-governing and ruling, mainly because the needs of the people should be ruled from where we are, from the people that where it is, not to deny the historical connections to our forefathers and to the early church, which we know that our church understands that we are an apostolic church that has apostolic roots and has canons and rulings and teachings that connect us to that early church. But at the same time, knowing the church grows and makes decisions and for the betterment or the growth of the church, not for who can rule over, to say they have a vast area or big a lot of people to lord over, but to truly say that we're building up and growing churches, because that's always been the case. When you look at the history of the church, it's always been about doing missionary work to grow the church, to building up communities to be grown. And so when later the church grew and become more important, then having more political status or power, then we start seeing this kind of need for who's in charge of what. But at the end, when you look at the most basic level, or what's the basis for the growth and how we're doing things, it's always should be in the needs for that community, right? And so sometimes there's a need for us to be needed to have spiritual leadership or even temporal leadership from someone far away. It's not to say that can happen, but at the same time, when we recognize that there's now a natural growth where now, just like a parent to children, we recognize that they stand on their own, and we need to support them to grow on their own. The same with the church says when the a region that's has been historically connected together is now being able to stand on its own as is equal, or as not as no longer parent child, but now uh, uh, as as now on the same footing, doing respecting the elder before them. uh, you can't just hold it over because of, you know, political reasons or for other reasons, because of other things. It should be grounded on the root of the faith. And so that's why our, you know, when we lay all this groundwork, we can see slowly that the church in India was always the church growing in India was always rooted and connected with the churches coming east, both either be it Persian and Antiochian. But at the same time, recognizing that the church also grew on its own. Because you imagine at that time, you know, India can, you know, there's not email and WhatsApp and things to connect in an instant what's going on in these other regions. They can't receive the minutes of a council or a synod. You know, it takes months and sometimes years to reach these other places. So there was understanding there was a certain level of independence always amongst these local churches, though they're an outgrowth of either the missionary work of an apostle or a disciple. These churches were given because these disciples and these apostles left bishops and priests to govern those regions and to continue the faith. They had the ability to continue to preach the gospel and to make sure it grows, but know that they connect with one another, sharing the same faith. That is always the key thing. That when all the churches come together, you know, we confess the one true faith. That's what we can all say, like the Nicene Creed together. We can say the Lord's Prayer together. We can say the great hope is that we say, you know, we can celebrate Qurbana together with as the body of Christ. That's the union of the, you know, the desire of our Lord too, that they all may be one, like He and the Father are one. That's the great purpose, not to see who is greater than the other. Even at the time of Christ, when the disciples saying who's going to be greater, and then we know our Lord rebuked them, but even showed them that, especially on that Holy Week, He became as a servant to them, washed their feet, saying, you can't be first unless you become the last. You can't be served if you're not willing to serve first. And so that is always the mindset that should always be there, that we have to make sure that we know that we are serving rather than being served, all first and foremost always. And so as these historical records are, as we're going through during this book, I'm hoping, because I'm going to wrap up here, as we're looking at who's saying what in our connection to the Persian church or the Antiochian church and things like that, we have to be mindful that the spread of Christianity was already growing. No matter who was in charge, missionary works were growing the church far and wide. Though there's not so much great unfortunately, like the work of our church in India, like, a lot of it's got lost. Or our church was our forefathers were content of being a special caste within the Kerala kingdoms, the kingdoms of the Kerala regions at that time. So we're very limited in our missionary work. But we know that these Syriac Christians, those who worship in the Syriac way, just like our church in Kerala or church in India, there were still missionary work, those who were working in spreading the faith, knowing that they don't know where they're, you know, how long and wide or where they're being sent, but they know that was their calling. And we stand because of their willingness to share the faith. We stand here worshiping the way we do because of their willingness to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, we wouldn't be here and we continue to be a community if there wasn't Christians from both India, Persia, Syria, wherever it might be. We're continuing throughout the centuries, building up and continuing and growing the faith. And that's what hopefully, as we continue this this book on the history of the church, that's how I'm hoping that is kind of we're being mindful of, because we can get lost in all the details of who said what and who's writing this, or what is this church father, historical historian saying, historical writer saying. But we have to be mindful that we take all these things and put them together to see a kind of a unified theme of how our church, not church meaning the people who are living at the time, are growing and connected to one another. Because in the end, it's a lot of it doesn't tell how is these individual churches, how is the church in, like, you know, in Cologne actually growing, how is that Telesari church actually, the people there, it doesn't mention who they were, other than that there was a church there, right? The people that were worshiping, they're not worrying about which patriarch or what's Catholicos, when they just know that they Achen, they have bishops, and they're connected with one faith with our fellow brothers and sisters who are coming from the east or west. That is the beauty of our faith, that we worship together as one and we share the faith as one. And so this history kind of highlights for us, though be complicated, and we know it goes back and forth, and there's a lot of ups and downs and political maneuvering. In the end, it hopefully should highlight that this community was continuing to grow and needing and fighting to thrive even during difficult times. I'm going to stop there. Just to wrap up, I'm getting a little tired as well from this evening. I'm sure many of you are as well. It's getting close to 6 o'clock. I'm going to stop here and just leave it for questions before it gets to 6 o'clock. Because I know many of you might have prayers. I know I have to get ready for prayer, the telephone prayer for my church going from here. So I'm gonna stop here for questions, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
Awesome. Thank you, Acho. I'll open the forum for everybody. If there are questions, they can type into the, or they can go ahead and unmute themselves and ask the question. So, Christian, there's one question that was there from the last time. One of the guys, one of the students had sent me this. I'll read it out. Okay. Yeah, John of Persia seems to have conflicting references in this unit. When it comes to Malankara churches established by St. Thomas, John's reference to the Council of Nicaea is used to prove the existence of the church in India. However, it is also mentioned that John of Persia may not be representing India, but probably Arabia or Ethiopia.
Okay, sorry. So then, just highlight that for you, so that it's true. Like when we look at this this John of Persia, that's why even in the book when VC Samlachan is writing this book and he's highlighting and mentioning, he's used in two ways, right? Back and forth. He, as a historical figure, we can't really pinpoint who he really was. We can use him to say for sure or for not. But as Achen mentions in this book, he's not a reliable figure to say that he for sure represents India, because that second part we're saying what really is India. Some people thought it was Ethiopia or parts of Saudi Arabia or things like that. There was no for sure way, like what the people there understood was the Great India. Did they even know it meant like the Indian subcontinent? No, at that time some people didn't even understand what they just knew there's somewhere east there's some spices coming. They have no, and they might have seen a map. Most of them probably haven't. They just know it's that general region, and so it's never clear where this John of Persia, of the great, representing the Great India, who he's really representing. Other than there was someone who was there that in the historical documents it mentions that, and so that's where we take his place in history, especially for our church. There was an understanding, at least, that though the people didn't know what India was, they knew India was a place where there was people where spices are growing, and those far east, and there was Christians that were there. There's Christians that were there, and so that's where we get that's where we take from him more than anything else. Not so much that he for sure represented our Kerala, like Malankara church, but that at least at that time there was an understanding that there was Christians who could come as that far east. From the first Nicene Council, there was an understanding or a belief that there could be, because to this day, like people, Europeans, modern people today, when we say we're Christians in Kerala or in India, they assume because of Western missionaries from the modern times, Portuguese or Roman Catholic missionaries who are coming in modern times because of the expansion of the European powers. Never imagining that early Christians knew that there were Christians in these eastern regions. And so that's what we take from him more than anything else. Not necessarily that he was specifically a Bitrimani for India or from Kerala or representing Kerala, but the fact that he represents the understanding that there are Christians who are from that eastern region, from what they understood as India, wherever it might be. And so that's pretty much all we can take. That there was, at least the early Christians could see, outside of the Roman Empire, which is India was east of them, there was missionaries and people who were being sent to and the Christian communities that were there. That's the most that we can take from his presence there, or the writing of his name in historical documents there. All right.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. Is there any other questions? Yeah, there is one. Why didn't Malankara church continue to its relation with Persian church through? There are few years it disconnected in the 15th century.
Okay, so that's a good question. So it was kind of kind of pointed out in the first chapters, but it'll come up later in the later unit chapters, because we know that once the Portuguese come, they cut off all connections with the Persian church, because they say we should be directly under Rome. Now that there are these Portuguese who are there, that's why even our church we say Maratala and some other Tiriminis were martyred before getting to the church of Malankara. Certain Tiriminis are being prevented during this time. But so particularly once the Portuguese come, no longer anymore allow, or at least being strongly prevented, these bishops from the Persian regions or from even Antioch, wherever it might be, are being prevented from reaching the church in Kerala, because now the Portuguese say, no, we are in charge of this church. They're no longer, they can't connect with anything outside of Rome because of the power play that the Portuguese want. They want these Christians there to be loyal to them. And so and to be loyal to the Pope, because the Pope will listen to the Portuguese and tell the Christians, hey, you need to do what the Portuguese people are saying, because that's our people, right? And so they're preventing them from coming. So that's why from that point forward, we have a limited to almost non-existent connection, especially for the 50 years when we're under after that Synod of Uriyampur, we are under the Roman Church. But then after the Kunan Cross Satya, we know that we ask help from the Eastern churches. And it says we send a church, and the history says we send the church letter to Babylon, or to the Persian church, to Alexandria, to the Patriarch of Alexandria, to Jerusalem, and then to Antioch. The one who responds is the Patriarch of Antioch, who responds and sends it to the Tirumeni. And so that's when we say our church has a strong connection to the Antiochian church. From that point forward, because they were the ones who responded to support our church during this time of crisis, then our church has a strong, and from that point forward, an indelible mark, being more towards Antiochian Christianity than Persian Syriac Christianity than anything else. So then that's why we have that break there, because that's why how big a presence the Portuguese have within our churches, within our history in India and Kerala particularly. They transformed the direction where our church was going. Sometimes for the better or worse, because we don't know if they didn't come, we don't know where our church would be, right? We wouldn't have need for connections. We might be more, we never know. We might be more like the Chaldea church, like that's in Thrissur, being more Persian connected, or naturally, we say that there was never always for sure direct connection, always being that way. But we know there was connections that say we also had to the Syrian side, but for sure, by the time the Portuguese come and then the Syrian Patriarch responds to our plea for help, then our church is firmly now more Syrian Patriarch or Antiochian Christianity than Persian, the Christianity coming from the Persian side, and going from there. So hopefully that answered. That's why we don't have any more Persian connections going forward from that point, that 15th century going forward.
Thank you.
So Achen, does that mean that even though we connected with the Antioch, the church here never continued to connect back to their Persian church since then?
No, there were still some minor connections. That's why you see some Tirumenis who are buried in different churches in Kerala. So there are some that are there, even some Rambans and things like that. But our connection was now very limited, because now our church, by the time after this Kunan Satya, these Tirumenis who are coming up from the Antiochian side, and these missionaries or these Tirumenis and Achens who are coming, and Rambans who are coming, we're fully becoming ingrained and unified under that form. Because our church was struggling. Half the community was going under the Roman rule, and then the other half was separating under the archdeacon, and now wanting to be continuing on our Eastern worshiping format, not going under the Western Roman side. And so our church, to make sure to solidify our presence, to be knowing as more the worship that our forefathers knew, not being Roman but being Eastern, then because we didn't see the Western or Antiochian format as being foreign to us. There was also Syriac, and it was still familiar. There might be a little bit some differences here and there, but we understood that was our sister or brother church, sister church. And so our church from that point forward fully took that on. And as someone even mentioned, because of Islam, rising from the 6th, 7th century onwards, and by the time of the 15th century, Islam is now fully ingrained, and there's the Ottoman Empire is a strong empire within in world politics. They also have a stronghold on limiting, the movement of Christians. That's another reason that possibly someone mentioned for the Persian church not being connected. but for sure, when the Portuguese come, there's no more, because even during the Islam time, there are still Persian Christians coming. That's why you go to Kulon. There's Mar Abo and Mar Andu. There's different places that have these random Didymanes of the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century who are buried in our churches. If you look at them, most likely they are all Persian Didymanes and Rambans who are being buried in these churches in our Kerala. Even during Islam rule of the Muslims coming higher, but once the Portuguese come, that all pretty much stops, and then our churches fully goes in line with the Anglican Church, because that's the church that helped us, and that's what helped our church community in Malankara at that time now rallies around that again. It's us who are Eastern or Orthodox, Syriac Christians versus the Roman, and that's where we make that separation, and that's where we make our clear distinction. We're not Roman. We are Syriac Christians, and then the Western Syriac rite becomes very much developed strongly within our Malankara Church from that point forward, and no longer the Persian form of Syriac Christianity is as strong. They're still there, like we said in Thrissur. The Chaldea Pali still has a base there, but they're very small, but still there with the church based in Thrissur. But our community, especially where our Malankara Church grew more and solidified under this Syriac, this Antiochian Syriac format. I hope that answered, Joshi. I don't know where it went. Okay.
So Achen, when the one of the points that the Portuguese make when they discover Christianity in Kerala is that they see that as a Nestorian church. Mm-hmm. So did our church recognize this? And since Nestorian church is a heretic, did our church recognize that? And did that have an influence in us losing contact with the Persian church and preferring the Western Syriac?
That's a good question, and that's part of it. Is it's true? Like in Kerala, we had no sense of this these fights in the Roman Empire, right? This Nestorianism or Arianism or these Nicene councils and ecumenical council that are happening in the Roman Empire have no direct impact in the church in Kerala, other than we receive certain Christians who are coming from these places and accepting. They're saying they're our fellow brothers, and sister, Christians, right? And so church in Kerala up to that point never had a distinction of, at least from writings, it never understood that there was Nestorian Christians or non-Nestorian Christians. And so when Christians from Persia came, and they're Syriac worshiping Christians, that's our sister church. And they're not particularly saying, you need to accept Nestorius, or particularly saying one way or the other. They're just worshiping as they normally do. It is only when at least it's more highlighted when the Portuguese come. Hey, they understand. They've already had connections with the Chaldea Pali in Persia, right? There's because of the Roman and Ottoman empires are going back and forth, but there's still some missionaries happening. There's a connection with the Chaldea Pali in where it is, in Iraq, current day in Babylon, and so they already said those are Nestorians, and they even have a Roman Chaldean patriarch there. And so when they come to India, they say, hey, you can transform your Nestorian way and accept us, just like we did in this Babylon, this Persian regions, and say, hey, you need to reform all your Nestorian writings or worshiping and make it more Roman, right? And so they're so then at that time, many of them went that way because we, for better or worse, the Portuguese had a lot of power and money, and they were also Christians, and our churches some people just went that way. But there was always a gnawing fact that it's not the same. They started reforming not to be Christian in the way that they understood it. Their way of taking up Nestorianism was to make it all Roman, more Latin, right? And so that's why we say even with the Syro-Malabar Church today, they say in their history there was a big it comes later. There's a big backlash. How do they go back to their roots, of their East Syriac roots? That's why for a long time there's a lot of when I was in seminary and we had visits from the Syro-Malabar seminary from Vadavador, the seminaries are mentioned, even in their history, you can see certain places where they have more Latin leaning or more Roman leaning churches or practices and more Syriac leaning churches, even to this day, having curtain, not having curtain, or, things are slowly being brought back, things like that, because of the Westernization of the church. But then knowing that they're more Eastern, we should be more Eastern, being the church in India, we're actually, if we're going to claim we're St. Thomas Christians, we know that we're more Eastern worshiping, not Western, not in the Western form, but the Eastern form. And so that does have an impact. And that's why our church was saying, we didn't have such a big, strong sense of Nestorian or not Nestorianism. Our big issue was Western form of worship was so much different from the Eastern form of worship. And so we knew that we had to, that was seen as Orthodox, or, as the form of worship. That's how we knew, because even by this time, the 15th, 16th century, the Catholic Church was already making a lot of certain reforms within their worship was very different from how, for better words, not to say their way was wrong, but very different from our Eastern form of worshiping. And so that's what our forefathers understood. This Western Latin form was too foreign for them. So then when the Margagores, do we say, from Jerusalem came, when they came to support us, when they sent the letter, and he helped elevate, and then gives the letter to elevate the archdeacon to be the bishop for our church in Malankara. We took that to say that we accepted it, because they were a sister church who was Eastern worshiping, who worshiped in the Syriac language, which was more familiar and comfortable to our people, and so in not being Western in worshiping.
Thank you, Church.
Yeah. And for someone also mentioned, our church, Malankara Church, wanted always peace and it would accept anybody. But like I said, but ideally it's still like even the Catholics are coming in peace in some way, but then they are changing the worship. And so that much we understood, we didn't want, it had to be, that's not the faith that was passed down to them. And so that was a key thing for them, accepting these Antiochian and Persian bishops, because that was what was familiar to them always. That was the faith that they understood more than anything else. The faith, Christianity being expressed in that form, in this Eastern form.
Okay. Thank you, Acho. I don't think there are any more questions, at least on the chat. So, Acho, thank you for this day. And as we have completed up to Unit 2, Chapter 1. So next week we'll start. Next week we'll start on Chapter 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I believe. Okay, Unit 2, Chapter 2,
Yeah.
and I'll so the next for everyone's understanding, the next class will be on the 17th Sunday would be there, and on that day I will announce the other additional classes that we would need for this. So we'll make that adjustments. I'll work with Chris Achen to see his availabilities, and I'll post that on that day. One quick thing is that about the summaries for the previous book. It was very nice that I got a lot of them, and a couple of them have responded back to me saying that there will be slight delays and all, which is fine. I'm hoping that I'll get all of them, because we have to bundle it together and send it to the Achen. So at least by the 10th or 11th, if you can respond back with the summaries for the first book, and if you have any issues with the compilation or etc., just give me a call and we can work through that. So that is another one information I wanted to pass it on. So a quick word of prayer and we can close this.
I think Santosh Achen is on the line. Achen is.
Yeah, I'm there.
Oh, yeah, I didn't see that. Santosh Achen. Yeah.
Thank you, Christopher Achen. Thank you, Alex, for information. I think you all are enjoying the history of our church. Especially this time, many clashes are going on. So we are interesting what is our relation with other churches and what's the history of our church. So it's a good book that this is the best time to learn. And I hope you all are enjoying. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you, Christopher Achen. You are taking a wonderful classes. So let's, end with the prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive our debts and sins, as we also have forgiven our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For thine is the kingdom, the power and glory, forever and ever. Amen. Peace be with you, Mary, full of grace. Our Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women. Blessed is the fruit of thy womb, our Lord Jesus Christ. O Virgin Saint Mary, O Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at all times, and the hour of our death. Amen. Achen, please, benediction.
Bodhikimar, may the love of God the Father, the grace of the only begotten Son, our Lord and our Savior Jesus Christ, and the communion and indwelling of the Holy Spirit be with us all, especially for all of our students who are in this Divyabodhanam, for all of our loved ones, both near and far, living and departed, both now and always and forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. You all have a happy and blessed New Year and a good night. Thank you.